The Platform Sutra by Zen Master Huineng, the sixth Patriarch of Zen Buddhism. Good friends, this Dharma teaching of mine is based on meditation and wisdom. But don't make the mistake of thinking that meditation and wisdom are separate. Meditation and wisdom are of one essence and not two. Meditation is the body of wisdom, and wisdom is the function of meditation. Wherever you find wisdom, you find meditation. And wherever you find meditation, you find wisdom. Good friends, what this means is that meditation and wisdom are the same. Fellow students of the way, be careful. Don't think that meditation comes first and then gives rise to wisdom, or that wisdom comes first and then gives rise to meditation, or that meditation and wisdom are separate. For those who hold such views, the Dharma is dualistic. Dualistic here means that our minds, in reality, if you are able to notice your minds, it can only think one way or the other way, meaning it can only think black or white, want or don't want, love or hate. So Dharma in Buddhism means nature, it means reality, it means nature as it is. So the Dharma is not dualistic like the mind. So if we try to use the mind to understand the Dharma, we will never get at the truth. And so he continues, if the mouth speaks of goodness, but the mind doesn't think of goodness, meditation and wisdom aren't the same. But if goodness pervades both the mouth and the mind, if what is external and internal are alike, then meditation and wisdom are the same. The cultivation of self-awareness does not involve argument. People who argue about which comes first and which comes second only confuse themselves. Unless you put an end to right and wrong, you will give rise to self-existent dharmas, and you will never be free of the four states. One practice, samadhi, means that at all times, whether walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, always practicing with a straightforward mind. The Vimalakirti Sutta says, a straightforward mind is the place of enlightenment, and a straightforward mind is the pure land. Don't practice hypocrisy with your mind, while you talk about being straightforward with your mouth. If you talk about one practice samadhi with your mouth, but you don't practice with a straightforward mind, you're no disciple of the Buddha. Simply practice with a straightforward mind and don't become attached to any dharma. This is what is meant by one practice samadhi. Deluded people who cling to the external attributes of a dharma get hold of one practice samadhi and just say that sitting motionless, eliminating delusions, and not thinking thoughts are one practice samadhi. But if that were true, a dharma like that would be the same as lifelessness and would constitute an obstruction of the way instead. So an example I can think of here is, for example, an external attribute of a dharma would be the breath. Most people hold on to the breath and think that not thinking is the way to samadhi. But holding on to the breath object like that is really just suppressing one's thoughts and one's feelings. So ignorance has not yet been eradicated. And sitting that way to suppress the mind is not opening the mind, and one can sit in delusion, in a calm delusion, thinking that that is the way to enlightenment. So he continues, the way has to flow freely. Why block it up? The way flows freely when the mind doesn't dwell on any Dharma. Once it dwells on something, it becomes bound. If sitting motionless were right, Vimalakirti wouldn't have criticized Shariputra for meditating in the forest. So he's saying that, so what Master Huineng is saying here is that thoughts are like the breath, is an external attribute, meaning it's a manifestation of nature. And if we were to block it up and not let it flow freely, again, we're just suppressing what we don't like and clinging to what we like. So in this way, there cannot be release of the mind. So if we continue to dwell on that suppression of the mind without allowing it to open, without allowing things to flow freely, such as feeling thoughts, without attaching to them, but just to suppress them because we don't like them, then we're bound to be fettered. So when he referred to the examples from Vimalakirti's Sutta, this sutta is actually a Mahayana sutta that is quite critical of the Theravada tradition. Because in the past, and even now, the Theravada tradition focuses a lot on solitude, silence, and meditation. But that does not mean that this tradition doesn't go out to help people or to teach meditation. They do. So I think this sutta was written in a time when there were arguments between the monks after the Buddha passed away. So Vimalakirti in this sutta is an enlightened layman, and he was actually scolding Shariputra for meditating in the forest. And Shariputra is actually one of the key disciples or one of the chief disciples of the Buddha who is enlightened. So I don't think it warrants such harsh treatment for a layman to scold an arhat. But it's really just to emphasize here that samadhi isn't a motionless, passive state, but it is able to be active and passive at the same time. So good friends, he said, I know there are people who tell others to devote themselves to sitting and contemplating their minds or purity and not to move or to think. Deluded people are unaware, so they turn things upside down with their attachments. There are hundreds of such people who teach the way like this, but they are, you should know, greatly mistaken. Good friends, what are meditation and wisdom like? They are like a lamp and its light. When there's a lamp, there's light, and when there's no lamp, there's no light. The lamp is the light's body, and light is the lamp's function. They have two names but not two bodies. This teaching concerning meditation and wisdom is also like this. Good friends, the Dharma isn't direct or indirect. It's people who are sharp or dull. For those who are deluded, there is indirect persuasion. For those who are aware, there is direct cultivation. Know your mind and see your nature. For those who are aware, there is basically no separation. For those who are unaware, there are infinite kalpas on the wheel of rebirth. So let me repeat that. For those who are aware, there is basically no separation. So no separation from what? So it's actually no separation from Dharma itself. So you're not taking on the manifestation or the external attributes of Dharma, of nature, but rather you are nature itself. So there's no separation. And when you're with nature itself, there is actually timelessness. So for those who are unaware, the infinite kalpas on the wheel of rebirth is long. There is infinite kalpas, meaning it is a kind of psychological rebirth. When we cling onto something, when we cling onto our breath, there's always a beginning and an end, and a beginning and an end. The same goes for our thoughts, and these are endless wheels of rebirth. So where there is no clinging, there is no rebirth. So in Buddhism, it focuses a lot on psychological rebirth as opposed to physical rebirth, as misunderstood by many people about what rebirth is. Good friends, since ancient times, this Dharma teaching of ours, both its direct and indirect versions, has proclaimed no thought as its doctrine, no form as its body, and no attachment as its foundation. What do we mean by a form? There is no form. To be free of form in the presence of forms. To be free of form in the presence of forms. Meaning you don't get attached to your own form, your own body, nor other people's bodies. And no thoughts. Not to think about thoughts. So this is like mindfulness of thoughts. If you're familiar with the Buddhist dependent origination, there are 12 links. The first one is actually ignorance. Second one is actually thoughts, thought formations. So when you can become aware of your thought formations, then it gives you a chance not to be ignorant anymore, because you're no longer absorbed into the dualistic nature of the mind, which is an attribute of the Dharma, but not the Dharma. So if we are the Dharma, we should stay within the Dharma and not go out of the thoughts. Because thoughts are not us. It's just a manifestation of Dharma. So he said, thought after thought, not to become attached. So this is when you are able to become mindful of thoughts. So thoughts, mindfulness of thoughts, is the third foundation of mindfulness in Vipassana. Whether it's a past thought, a present thought, or a future thought, let one thought follow another without interruption. Once the thought is interrupted, the Dhamma body becomes separated from the material body. When you go from one thought to another, don't become attached to any Dharma. Once one thought becomes attached, every thought becomes attached, which is what we call bondage. But when you go from one thought to another without becoming attached to any Dharma, there's no bondage. This is why no attachment is our foundation. Good friends, no form means externally to be free of all forms. If you can just be free of forms, the body of your nature is perfectly pure. This is why we take no form as our body. So, becoming aware of the body is actually the first foundation of mindfulness in the teaching of the four foundations of mindfulness, commonly called Vipassana, which many people practice nowadays, but isn't very clear about the practice. So when you become mindful of the body, it is the same as when you're mindful of your thoughts, except one is a grosser object, the body, and one is a finer, subtler object, the thought. So when we become mindful, means we know the arising and ceasing of each object, but also realize that we are not them, because they are not permanent. They rise and they cease moment to moment. What is calm, what is serene, what is peaceful cannot change so quickly. It cannot keep changing. What you are is something that is not impermanent. What you are is something permanent. Our true identity, if it has to be an identity at all, it should be a permanent one and not an impermanent one. So he said, to be unaffected by any object is what is meant by no thought. To be free of objects in our thoughts and not to give rise to thoughts about dharmas. But don't think about nothing at all. Once your thoughts stop, you die and are reborn somewhere else. Students of the way, take heed. Don't misunderstand the meaning of this teaching. It's one thing to be mistaken yourself, but quite another to lead others astray than to criticize the teaching of the sutras while remaining unaware that you yourself are lost. So the word empty your mind, empty your thought may seem like to suppress your thoughts, suppress your thinking in Zen Buddhism. So now you know that's not true. It's just not to be attached to thoughts and to be mindful of them, to cut off the link of thought form in dependent origination, which is the second link. To cut off is not to eliminate. To cut off is to be mindful, to pay attention to the awareness rather than to the thoughts themselves. Because awareness itself doesn't arise, doesn't cease, it doesn't die. So to continue, thus, the reason we proclaim no thought as our doctrine is because deluded people think in terms of objects, and on the basis of these thoughts, they give rise to erroneous views. This is the origin of all afflictions and delusions.